Welcome back to Hold Fast, where we have biblical truths for daily battles. My name is Kenny. I'm the host of the podcast, and we are continuing our series through questions and answers from my sermons on Sunday. If you are not already aware, our church, MissionWay Church, is doing a sermon series called Did God Really Say? And we're addressing some of, not all of, but some of the most controversial subjects of our day. And what I have said is I can't answer everybody's questions in just a 40-minute sermon. So I'm giving the opportunity for people to send questions in each week as you watch or listen to the sermon. You can email me questions at kennyroberts@missionwaychurch.org, and I'll launch podcast episodes, each Wednesday, and I will seek to answer every question that comes in. And even if you are listening to this episode and you didn't get a chance to ask a question you wanted to about this sermon, feel free to still send them in, because each episode of this series, I'll take questions, even if they are from previous sermons, because I don't want to miss the opportunity to answer questions that you may have. So don't feel like it's too late. Email them in. And even if this series is long over, email me a question anyway. I'd love to correspond with you over email, or even sit down and have a cup of coffee and talk about these things as well. This is not your only chance, but it is a chance that I wanted to give to you to hopefully answer some of your questions. So this week's topic is transgenderism, and unsurprisingly, we had quite a few questions come in. I had several conversations with people that I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to reveal any details or names or anything like that. I'm going to keep it strictly confidential and private, but I want to talk about some of the things that I've been talking about and some of the questions that have come in this past few days. Somebody asked, first question, how should I respond when my young child asks in public in front of a transgender person, are they a boy or a girl? This is a scenario that many parents either already have or expect to at some point encounter something like this. So this is really a really important question. First, what do I say in the moment while in public? And second, how do I reconcile that to a young child in private after the fact? First of all, let me say that it's a great recognition that you're going to need to have different approaches and different conversations. One of them will be in public in the moment, and another conversation in private with your child. You need to understand first and foremost, and I know you already know this, but I think it's worth saying at the outset, the priority here as a parent for you is discipling your child through this moment. I think immediately as a parent, this panic sets in, right? Because you're like, I don't want to offend somebody. I don't want to start some kind of argument here in public. I want to protect my child. I want to talk to my child. So again, don't have a posture of fear. Don't have a posture of uncertainty and anxiety. Have a posture of a desire to disciple and love your child through this, okay? That's what we keep in mind. Having said that, this is similar to some other questions that I've dealt with in this series where I'm saying, there's not a one-size-fits-all answer. So I want to be as helpful as I can be in giving you some things to think through and some general principles to help guide you as you think about this conversation. One of the first things that I would say is to pray first. I love the story of Nehemiah when Nehemiah is before the king and the king is asking him, what's wrong, and Nehemiah prays before he says a word to the king. That should be our posture in so many scenarios, and this being one of them. Say a short, to yourself, obviously, just quick prayer and ask the Lord for wisdom and strength as you get ready to face this moment with truth and with love. I think that you should do your best to shepherd and disciple your child through this moment without creating any conflict, if possible, in the moment. What you don't want to do is to loudly point out your child's question and to loudly make some kind of statement of belief in that moment. If this person in question that your child is asking about did not overhear your child ask the question, you have an opportunity to just lean in close to your child and say, hey, we can talk about that a little bit later. Let's have a conversation later about this. If they do overhear it, that can create a challenge, because we live in a culture where if this individual overhears your child ask that question, it's possible that they're going to get even closer to figure out how you're going to respond as a parent, because they're ready to attack in some scenarios, right? They're going to be ready to see how you're answering your child in that moment. And again, your priority is your child. And so if you do find yourself in a contentious, argumentative situation, I think what you need to be willing to say to this individual is, hey, I respect you as a person. I believe that you have been created in the image of God, and I love you, and I care for you, but my priority is my child and how I believe that I need to parent my child. I would like to have a conversation with my child in private about this. I'm not asking you to believe what I believe. I'm not asking you to take anything that I say at face value. I'm just asking that you respect me enough to allow me to parent my child in the way that I see fit. And if they're not wanting to listen to you, or they're still wanting to argue, you may have to just walk away from the conversation. You may find yourself in a scenario where you're just going to have to get out of the situation. Again, the priority being your child and discipling them in that moment, not necessarily appeasing everybody around you. I don't think in most cases it's going to be the best decision to try to have some kind of philosophical argument in that moment. Number one, your young child is not going to fully understand the conversation that you're having with this other person, and they're your priority. And number two, in most of these kind of scenarios, your best option is not going to be to try to engage in that conversation in that moment. Now, if it's somebody that you know and your child points this out in public and you haven't had a conversation with them about what you think yet, then it may be an opportunity for you to say, hey, I'd love to talk with you more about this another time. Can I first please have a conversation with my child in public, in private, and then you and I have a sit down conversation? Again, say something to the effect of, I don't want to have an argument. I don't want to have a fight, but I want the opportunity to talk to my child about something that I believe to be very important in private before I have this public conversation. So try to respond as best you can. Again, not out of fear or avoidance of the situation, but out of protecting your child and having the opportunity to prioritize that private conversation with them above anything else in that moment. I think that would be my priority as a parent. Having said all that, I understand that I've probably not addressed every potential outcome of this situation, and nor would I be able to in a short podcast or even probably in a long podcast. There's so many different ways this can play out. So that's why I said start with prayer, start with a desire to disciple and parent your child through this, and trust the Lord. Trust the Lord to guide you and to protect you and to help you through these scenarios. There's not a one-size-fits-all answer, but there's also not a tie a bow on it answer. There's not anything that anybody can tell you that will ensure that you'll always get through this situation with flying colors. So give yourself grace as a parent. Give yourself grace, give your child grace, and learn from it. And then you're better prepared the next time that something like this happens, right? So I think we've got to not be too hard on ourselves, but at the same time, be as prepared as we possibly can be for moments like that. Maybe just one more note on this point. Make sure that when you have that private conversation with your child, that what you're presenting before them is a biblical worldview, and what you're presenting for them is this picture of speaking the truth in love. Let your child see you in the public moment and in the private moment be seeking to speak the truth in love. Let your child hear from you a biblical worldview. And so you don't get home and just instantly go on a tirade and bashing this person that you saw in public. You make sure that you communicate very clearly that this person that you saw is somebody who's made in the image of God, but that God made us male and female. You talk to them about the things that we talked about in the sermon on Sunday, right? So make sure that you use that whole scenario as an opportunity to disciple your child, not just in what you're saying, but in how you're saying it and how you're handling it. Don't and I know you know this, but it's just worth reminding ourselves sometimes as parents, don't berate your child for asking the question. Don't get onto their case for asking it in public. You may want to have a conversation with them where you say, I love that you asked the question. I would love it if you would pull me aside in private when you have questions like this. I mean, try to coach them a little bit to not just blatantly say things in public. It's very innocent on their part. So don't berate them or discipline them for that, obviously, but just make sure that's a coaching moment as well, where you're trying to help your child through that scenario. All right. Next question was, what would be the difference in the biblical worldview for someone to alter their body to correspond to the opposite gender? So in other words, what's the difference in somebody having a transgender surgery, for example, and someone having just, for example, plastic surgery? I think, something like altering your physical appearance, right? You're not necessarily changing your gender or making foundational changes, but you're just having these procedures done to alter your appearance because for whatever that reason may be. The first thing I would say is that these are two different categories. There are some similarities here in a sense, but fundamentally it's different to say I'm going to alter my gender and to say I'm going to slightly alter my physical appearance. Those are two different categories of procedures, right? From a biblical standpoint, because God created us male and female. Yes, God created our physical appearance, but there's things that we do from time to time to alter that. We get something as simple as a haircut to even makeup and jewelry and things like that, right? So we have to make sure we understand these are two different categories. So the next thing I would say is, in either of these scenarios, the question needs to be asked, why? Why do you want to do this procedure? Again, whether that's a procedure that someone wants to do to try to change their gender, even though ultimately I don't believe someone can do that. You can alter your physical appearance all you want, but you still are who God made you to be, right? That's in your DNA, and that's something you can't alter, okay? I understand people disagree with us about that, but that would be the biblical worldview. But you need to understand why. Why is it that you want to have this procedure? Because you're trying to change your gender. And then on the other side, it's why do you want to have this procedure to change your physical appearance? Because it's possible that it can be sinful to have a plastic surgery, for example, or a procedure to change your appearance, because it could be that you are just simply discontent with how God made you, and that physical appearance has become an idol for you, right? That happens with a lot of people, and that's something that can be sinful and does need to be talked through. I'm not saying it's always sinful. There are legitimate medical reasons to get procedures like that. There are legitimate issues of personal comfort and discomfort that people get procedures like that, right? And this podcast is not going to serve as an opportunity to go through all the examples of that, but I think you get the point here that these are two different categories. But in either situation, we do need to have a posture of trying to figure out, why does an individual want to do this? Why is it that they are seeking this surgery, either from the viewpoint of seeking to want to change their gender, or even just a physical appearance thing? So I do think they're different. I think it's a completely different conversation. It's always sinful, for example, to have a surgery in the pursuit of changing your gender. It's not always sinful to have a procedure done to change your physical appearance. Okay, so hopefully that's helpful, and that answers anybody's questions and objections to that. Next question: should we use someone's preferred pronouns? And in short, I'm going to say no, and now let me explain. Why should we not do this? Why, if somebody is a biological male and they are trying to live life as a female and they want us to use pronouns she and her, why would we not do that? What's the big deal with that? Maybe we don't agree with it, but why would we intentionally offend them? Why would we intentionally do something that seems so unloving to them? Well, as a Christian, we are to be people of the truth. God cannot lie. He is truth, and he calls us to be people of the truth. And to use pronouns that do not correspond to someone's biological God-given gender from the Christian standpoint is a lie. It's giving into what we believe to be a delusion and a lie, and we can't do that. As people of the truth, we just simply cannot do that. Now, you don't have to be angry and combative about this. You can very simply just express to someone your biblical worldview and why it is that you would struggle doing that. You can be really compassionate with them and saying, I love you. I want so bad to respect you. I know this is really important to you, and I am not seeking to offend you. I'm not seeking to drive a wedge in our relationship, but you're asking me to do something that goes against my deeply held religious beliefs, not even just purely from a transgenderism standpoint, but from a truth versus lies standpoint. And I can't do that. I just can't do that. No matter how much I may want to honor you and respect you, I'm going to do that in every way I possibly can. But this is not one of those ways that I can do that. And I hope you'll respect that. I thought it would be helpful for me to read actually a response that this is a real life scenario, by the way. This actually happened. I got a hold of an email that a Christian employee sent to their boss. Their boss was asking everybody in this company to include their pronouns, their preferred pronouns, in their email signatures, right? And this Christian employee went against his convictions and his conscience, and he couldn't do that, but he wanted to respond in a respectful way. So I'm going to read this response, and if you would like a copy of this, by the way, send me an email, and I would love to send you this response in its entirety because I thought it was really good. So this employee said, I appreciate the goal of mutual respect and creating a welcoming environment for everyone. My desire is to be respectful of everyone. The expectation to display my pronouns asks me to accept a premise that I can't accept, namely that my pronouns could be different than he/him. It's an ontological claim about the nature of reality, and I hold a different view. I'm not asking those that are transgender to accept my view of reality, but I'm being asked to accept theirs. I can live and work with respect toward anyone with differing beliefs than my own, including my transgender coworkers. Can I be respected in my beliefs that differ on the nature of gender and identity while affirming the dignity of every person? I thought that was a great response. And thankfully, in this scenario, the the boss decided not to go through with this policy. Now, that won't always happen. And in just a second, I'll talk about maybe how to respond then. But this is a great response. It affirms the dignity and God-given value of every single person. It reaffirms for the boss that I really want to respect everyone, and I can do that. But this is an area that I don't believe I should be forced to do, and I don't have to say something I believe to be a lie in order to show respect and honor toward my coworkers. And so, again, I think that's a great response. I think it forces the employer and the person that you're speaking to really think about not just the fact that you disagree, but to think about the fact that you really love and you want to respect, but your beliefs prevent you from taking this specific action. So what do you do if you give this kind of response, whether in a personal relationship or with an employer, and they reject it and they continue to insist that you must use these pronouns? In the relationship situation, a personal relationship, somebody that you're speaking to, again, you just need to be honest. You need to be compassionately honest and say, I love you. I so badly want to respect you, but this is just not something I can do. And I hope you'll respect me enough that you won't force me to do that. And understanding that in some of those scenarios, that person is just going to get angry and not want anything to do with you. But pray that the Lord would use it to not drive them further away, but would drive you deeper into conversations about the gospel. If it's a workplace situation and your boss is forcing you to do something that you believe would violate your convictions and beliefs, then you send an email like this, send a response like this, and if they continue to insist, have another sit down with them if you can, and just say, once again, here's why I cannot do this. Here's the truth that I want to respect and honor the people around me, but I can't do what you're asking me to do. And so if you're going to require this, I need to know what I should expect because I'm not going to follow through with this. And it's not because I don't respect you. I will continue to work hard at my job. I will continue to do my work with excellence. I will continue to respect you as my boss. But this is just not simply an area where I can do that. If you have the opportunity, talk about the different spheres of authority with them, that as your boss, they have authority over you in the workplace, but that the Lord is the one who ultimately has the authority over you based on your morals and your principles and your character, and that's who you're going to submit to in this. I mean, it's a response that the apostles had before the Pharisees, right? We're going to obey God rather than men on this issue, and you need to say that humbly and gently, but firmly as well. So no, I don't believe we should use people's preferred pronouns, and some people will disagree with me on this next point, but I'm not as strong in my answer when it comes to using people's preferred names, right? So sometimes people are given a masculine name at birth and they want a more feminine name to be used of them nowadays. I don't believe that's on the same level as using pronouns, because pronouns fundamentally are making claims about a biological reality, whereas names are not doing that, right? Using somebody's name, even though we have names that we more associate with males and females, names in and of themselves don't inherently communicate gender in the same way that pronouns do, right? So I think it's slightly different. I think that in these situations, try to do your best to avoid offending. Try to avoid using pronouns or names when you can, right? I mean, you can't always do that, but when you can, try to avoid making unnecessary offenses, but don't give in, and be willing to have a conversation with respect and with love and with humility with the people that are asking you to do this. So the next point here, somebody didn't necessarily ask a question, but they sent, I thought, just some encouraging and helpful comments, and I just wanted to point it out and make a few points on it here in the podcast. They talked about the fact that they loved this talk about biblical worldview, that it's so much better and easier in some ways to talk about worldviews with people than to just talk in strictly black and white, right and wrong terms, right? So instead of just standing in front of people and saying, I believe this is sinful, we go back to Genesis and we go back to the biblical worldview and we say, because I believe everybody's made in the image of God, here's why I can't do that, right? And that's a very helpful conversation. And this person just expressed a desire to fulfill the Great Commission and feeling sometimes like it's just really hard because we don't always know the right things to say and the right things to do in every situation. And so it's really helpful to have this foundation in these biblical worldviews that you can go to. Instead of feeling like you have to memorize every scripture and memorize every talking point, you can build into yourself these fundamental understandings and worldviews to be prepared to give an answer to the people that ask. And this person specifically said, I want to start keeping a Bible with me at all times so that I can go through the Bible with people, right? So that I can show them what the Bible has to say about this. And I think that's a great point. I think that's something that we should be more willing to do. We should be willing to slow down with people and to open up our Bibles and to show them why we believe what we believe and why we're acting the way that we are towards them. So thanks for those comments, and I hope that was kind of a helpful few moments there. Next question. Somebody said a transgender family member or a family friend, somebody who is regularly invited to family gatherings, brings their partner with them, and they have public displays of affection at these family gatherings, right? So they're asking, how should believers respond in this scenario? And this can probably go, similar answers can be given for a homosexual couple, right? And so what happens when a transgender family member brings their partner and there is public displays of affection happening, especially if you have kids, your kids are there? How do you respond publicly in this scenario? They're saying if it was a God-honoring relationship according to God's design, there would be no issue, but how do I respond here? Again, it's so difficult, right? I mean, these are real people. These are real relationships. These are real family gatherings, and we're not trying to cause a stir. We're not trying to rock the boat, but at the same time, we're trying to continue to be people of the truth. It's going to somewhat depend on your relationship with this family member or family friend. You very likely are going to want to try your best to have a conversation with them and to just explain why it makes you uncomfortable. I think it's not a perfect parallel, but I think of a situation like, let's say if I had a family member who was consistently getting drunk at family gatherings in front of my children, I would want to be willing to have a conversation with them and say, look, you got every right to live your life the way that you want to live it. I can't control that. I'm just asking that you please not do that in front of my children. And I'm not trying to control your life. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I'm simply just asking for the respect and the courtesy that because I have a different view of the world and a different view of what's right and wrong here, that you would respect me and my kids enough to not do these things in public. And that's going to somewhat depend on what kind of relationship you have with the person. Maybe you don't know them that well and you're not able to have that private conversation. Then you're going to have to make some decisions based on which family gatherings will we attend. I mean, there may be times that you just decide we're not going to go to this for right now. And I'm not saying avoid all family gatherings, but there may be other situations where you have the conversations with your kids and the rest of your family members in private. You talk about what's right and what's wrong. You talk about the fact that you can't control what other people do. You can't avoid every situation where you're going to be around people doing sinful things. You can't shield your kids from every single scenario. So you have to do your best to shepherd them through it. You have to do your best to stand on truth, to be willing to have conversations with people, and to be willing to be people of the truth who speak the truth in love. I'm going to be honest, this week, questions were probably more difficult to answer, not because I don't believe the Bible gives us answers, but because on this topic, more than some of the others that we've talked about, there's so many possible scenarios here, right? I mean, the issue of transgenderism has so many nuances and so many different stories behind it and so many different scenarios that we're going to encounter that it's really hard to give it's not hard to give truthful answers. It's just hard to give answers that are nuanced enough to address every single particular possibility you might be facing. So again, feel free to ask follow-up questions if needed, but I hope that what I've done is at least give you principles that help guide you through these conversations. And it's important. I think maybe as I begin to wrap up, it's important for me to say that as Christians, we need to equip ourselves for these conversations. We need to not pretend that we're not going to face them. We need to not pretend that it's not important to know how to address them. We need to prepare. We need to study. We need to plan, but we need to trust the Lord. We need to trust the Lord to give us what it is He wants us to say in these moments. We need to trust His word to be sufficient for life and godliness, that the answers that we need are found in the pages and principles of Scripture. We need to trust that the Holy Spirit will guide us as we have these conversations and will go before us as we have these conversations. And we need to understand that God has not ultimately given us the responsibility to change anybody's mind and heart, right? So I'm not called to go out and to change everybody's mind about the issue of transgenderism. I'm called to go out and preach the gospel. And also, I'm called first and foremost to shepherd my family well. So I don't have the same responsibility to strangers or even acquaintances in the world as I do to my wife and my children. That's who I need to focus on. That's who I need to shepherd. That's who I need to teach and to raise up to know how to handle these issues. And then when I encounter these issues in public, I need to boldly and lovingly and compassionately stand on the truth. I also think that we need to go eyes wide open into the fact that as Christians, we're called to love and to compassion. We're called to go into these conversations with humility and with grace. And many unbelievers are not going to have that same desire. If you look on the news, if you watch videos on YouTube of conversations that happen in public, you'll see Christians trying really hard. And I'm not saying Christians are perfect. A lot of Christians have gotten this really wrong, but I'm just in general terms talking. You'll see a lot of Christians who are really trying to be humble and gracious and slow in their response. And the person on the world side is just attacking and interrupting and being rude and hateful and bigoted, all while telling the Christian that they are the one who is being hateful and bigoted. And we need to recognize that. We need to be honest about the fact that the world is not going to have the same standards that we have because our hearts have been changed. We're a new creation and they are still bound to their sin and we've been freed. That doesn't give us pride over them. It just simply recognizes that we have a different ethic. We have a different worldview, and we need to not expect unsaved people to act like Christians. We need to not expect unsaved people to understand the things that we understand as Christians. We need to give them grace in that, and we need to have patience with them in that. But let's not be naive about the fact that there are many people in the world who simply want to try to expose and to attack Christians as being unloving and bigoted. So we need to be wise. We need to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves, as Jesus said. We need to not cast our pearls before swine, as Jesus said. We need to stand boldly on the truth, but we need to have discernment. We need to pray through these scenarios, and we need to ask the Lord to guide us as we go and to protect us and to protect our families as much as possible in these scenarios. Thank you, as always, for listening to Hold Fast. If this podcast has been helpful to you, informative to you, I would love it if you share it. The truth is that the best way for people to find out about the podcast who don't already know about it is if you give a rating and review. So go into wherever you're listening to this podcast and give a 5-star rating. That I would hope a 5-star rating anyways. If you have anything less than that, I'll take it, but I really would like the 5-star ratings. That will help more people see the podcast, is the point there. It's not because you're boosting my ego. That has nothing to do with that. It just helps more people find the podcast. And a review helps as well. Just tell people why you love the podcast, right? 2 or 3 sentences. It doesn't need to be long. Just tell people why you think the podcast is helpful. I would greatly appreciate that, and it will help other people find out about it. So, as I said, I'm going to link in the show notes to the sermon from Sunday. I'm also going to link in the show notes to Rosaria Butterfield's book, 5 Lies of the Anti-Christian Age. It's a new book. It's a phenomenal book. And in the appendix of that book, she actually takes some common questions that we as Christians have about how to respond in certain situations, like what you all have asked about here. And she gives answers to that. And I think she does a great job of giving answers to those questions. So the whole book is helpful. That appendix section is helpful. It's going to be a good book for you to read with alongside of this sermon series. So I will link that book in the show notes as well. Thanks as always for listening to Hold Fast. I will be back next week, Lord willing, with another episode. God bless.